talk about obesity, and I talk about metabolically healthy obesity and unhealthy obesity. That's my topic. But now I'm not going to talk about that. So if anybody wants to hear about that, you have to talk to me directly. So the outline of my talk will have four parts. First, I'm going to talk about obesity and inflammation. And then I'm going to cover the association with obesity-related diseases, of how inflammation mediates that. Then I will focus on inflammation resolution, which we heard about a little bit yesterday. Regarding inflammation. So first of all, obesity and inflammation. I mean, obesity, you might have heard, that is defined as a state of chronic low-grade inflammation. That's what obesity is. And usually it is. Not always, but usually it's known like that. So the problem is not obesity itself, but the problem is that with inflamed adipose tissue, we get all sorts of diseases because adipose tissue is the biggest endocrine organ that we have, and it talks with all other metabolic organs. So that's the problem with obesity, beyond the aesthetic and all the not comfortable things about being having obesity. Is the problem that you have all these diseases that increase the morbidity and the probabilities of death. So acute versus chronic inflammation. I wanted to start with that. And I love this book that defines inflammation as a smart process that acts like the two edges of a sword, right? We need inflammation. Inflammation is not always the bad guy, right? It usually is when it's not resolved. But our body has inflammation processes for a reason, and we need it. And then later we're going to see that if we suppress inflammation, we get in trouble. So it's a smart process that acts like the two edges of a sword. I think it's kind of small, but I'm going to walk you through this. But okay, you have the tissue injury that we have talked about, infection and all that, and we get acute inflammation. And then we get resolution. So you're supposed to get the resolution for that inflammation. So you get the resolution, yes, you get back to homeostasis and everyone's happy and can go on with their lives. But if you don't get this resolution process, you get chronic inflammation, and that's when the problem begins, right? So in other words, you get here this timeline when you get the injury at the first, incident, and you get all these, the secretion of all these, the mediators of inflammation that we have been talking about and we have been hearing about yesterday and today. So we get the intensity of response that has to go up in order to resolve the problem that has been appeared. And then we get all these other mediators that we heard about yesterday. I don't think Jessica is here today. I'm sorry about that, but she talked about Marcin 1. But you get all these mediators of inflammation resolution, and when that happens, you get the resolution, you return to normal physiology. That's how it's supposed to be. So again, here you have all these injuries that go to acute inflammation, but then you get, if you go from acute to chronic inflammation, that's when you get all the problems that we have talked about in these sessions. So what about obesity? Like I said before, it's a chronic low-grade inflammatory condition. And what happens inside, besides what you see outside obesity, what happens inside is that normal adipose tissue, which we already told you that was a very important endocrine organ, very important for homeostasis, adipose tissue is not the enemy, as many people think. When it changes and it overgrows because of that nutrition, you get all these changes in the cellularity, in their interaction with other organs, in many things that happen to adipose tissue, among those inflammation, but also hypoxia, many other things that we have been talking about these couple of days. So when that happens, and this is the paradigm of the obesity-induced diseases, that as you get overnutrition, you go from a lean and healthy state adipose tissue that behaves nicely to adipose tissue expansion inflammation, and you get a disorder in all the balance of the secretory products of adipose tissue. You get more pro-inflammatory, less anti-inflammatory, and all the homeostasis that adipose tissue is in charge of, we lose it. So then we get this positive feedback where all these mediators start being elevated more and more, and then it gets worse because it recruits lots of new pro-inflammatory cells, and we finally end with the obesity-related associated pathologies, which I'm going to get into with a little bit more detail. And in the meantime, you also get increased hypoxia and decreased insulin sensitivity, which is a big problem. So what happens? The adipose tissue, the immune cell composition changes when, among all the changes that I mentioned, one very important change is that the immune cell composition changes within adipose tissue. So you get all these very nice immunomodulatory cells and balance within healthy adipose tissue, which respond to any kind of acute challenge, like more food, like if you go to a party and eat a lot of food and a piece of cake and whatever, you eat, that's an injury, like a very small one. I mean, well, it could be smaller or not, but it can be resolved because adipose tissue is prepared for that. You store more safely, and then you go on with your life, you do sports, and you don't eat all those cakes every day. So if you go back to normality, that's fine. Okay? But if you don't do that, and you live a life that is constantly injuring your poor adipose tissue, it becomes larger and larger, and you can't endure all that damage. And that's when we get into trouble. And that's when we get infiltration of all these pro-inflammatory cells that then get this different secretory profile that becomes pro-inflammatory and goes everywhere. And one of those, well, here, sorry, it's so small, but we get then a series of the same mediators that we have been talking about during these 2 days, TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, etc. And then we also get a decrease in the good mediators, such as IL-10, adiponectin, which is an adipokine, a very important anti-inflammatory adipokine. So we get this imbalance that is in favor of this inflammatory state. The other important secretory product, I'm going to mention it later, but I want just to mention it now so that you remember it here, is fatty acids. Because this, as like I said, adipose tissue needs to store the fat, and then it stores it safely, and we're okay. But when it's not able to store it safely, for example, and there's pro-inflammatory stimuli, it starts doing a lot of lipolysis. Lipolysis is the degradation of the triglyceride, and these fatty acids go into circulation. And those fatty acids, when they reach other organs that are not prepared to store the fat, get into trouble. So fatty acids is a very important pro-inflammatory also mediator, besides their own signaling that is also pro-inflammatory in the cells. So this is the vicious circle of adipocyte hypertrophy. So we have here in adipose tissue where we eat more than we spend, and we get these hypertrophic adipocytes, which start secreting these signals that recruit circulating monocytes to become pro-inflammatory markers. So you see the tissue, and then everything starts to be unbalanced. And one of the other things, and I'm going to repeat that, but one of the other consequences of the pro-inflammatory status is that it inhibits new pre-adipocyte recruitment, which means that the adipocytes that are already there must be in charge of storing the extra and all the expression of addition molecules in the epithelium and the transmigration of the monocytes into the tissue, and within the tissue you also have all kinds of signals that cause these monocytes to be preferably differentiated into the M1 phenotype. We have also talked about that, which is the phenotype that causes the inflammatory consequences. And here in another, just to mention all the actors here, but I put this one just to mention that there's a very important feature in adipose tissue which is called crown-like structures. And you see here that it's M1 adipocytes that surround a M1 macrophage that surround dying adipocytes. And this is a feature, a histological feature of sick adipose tissue that's very, very related to the relationship of obesity with our other diseases. So that those are the crown-like structures. This is a very nice picture that I always like to describe, which is the crosstalk between adipocytes and adipose tissue macrophages in obesity. So we have here this very pernicious cycle, in which we have here an M1 macrophage that secretes, among others, TNF-alpha. So adipocytes have a TNF-alpha receptors, so that in order, when it's stimulated, we get more TNF-kappa B, NF-kappa B production, which we all know that it stimulates the transcription and secretion of all kinds of inflammatory products. And also we stimulate by that lipolysis, and I mentioned earlier that lipolysis increases free fatty acid release, and free fatty acids have their receptor act through the TLR4 receptor that is present both in the adipocytes and in the infiltrated macrophage. So we have this cycle that doesn't look good, and among the adipokines and pro-inflammatory secretory products from the adipocytes, we also have MCP1 or CCL2 that is going to recruit more macrophages. So this doesn't look really good. And the other thing that is a mediator of problems within the context of obesity and adipose tissue and inflammation is that all these mediators, pro-inflammatory mediators, they inhibit insulin signaling, right? I'm sure you have seen these kinds of figures in which we have this variation of the IRS1, and it prevents proper insulin signaling, and of course that's the origin of many of the comorbidities in obesity. So how does obesity relate to other diseases? It's because, like I said before, adipose tissue, particularly visceral adipose tissue, which is the more risky adipose tissue depot that we have around the center, secretes, like I said, many of these products that are changed because of the obesity state, and go to other organs, other metabolically relevant organs. And there, of course, things happen because they're not prepared to receive all these things. And here are some examples of what happens in adipose tissue itself when there's inflammation in adipose tissue and other organs too. These are just a few examples, right? So you can see there that every target or every target of adipose tissue secretions is going to respond, and in a very good way. So you have lipogenesis in the liver, the development, of course, of steatosis, skeletal muscle, which is very important for insulin activity, and glucose regulation becomes insulin resistant, and so on. So the thing is that adipose tissue communicates with these other organs and gets them into trouble. And a few examples then, so why we have all these obesity-related diseases. The mechanism is very similar, so I'm going to go fast with these. But for example, I have here liver disease or steatosis or steatohepatitis, which could lead into cirrhosis or liver cancer. And it's basically different mechanisms, but they all start with this sick adipose tissue that secretes more serum fatty acids. So we have more serum fatty acids, more circulating fatty acids, and we have all the pro-inflammatory mediators. So we have here the cytokines that, of course, change the metabolism in the recipient organ, in this case the liver, and it changes, as you can see, it becomes triglycerides are more synthesized, so become septotic. We get mitochondrial dysfunction because, remember, I also said that fatty acids signal in the recipient cell, so we get what's called a lipotoxicity, which alter mitochondrial function, and we get here stress and all those mechanisms that we have talked about. Also, there's a whole story about gut microbiome being altered in obesity, which also help to create this whole LPS, high LPS and high inflammatory environment that, of course, the target organ suffers. In terms of cardiovascular disease, it's kind of the same mechanism. So we have all these inflammatory mediators that cause the changes in the arterial lymphoma, which activate the monocytes and create the bone cells and so on and so forth. So we get this, of course, all these consequences and the well-known cardiovascular risk of obesity. And in this case, we also show, what I mentioned before, the resistance in the muscle that, of course, doesn't help. And here, well, that's just I put this just to mention one thing, that I remember I said that visceral obesity was the more risky one, right? Rather than the fact that usually women accumulate more in the hips or legs and so on. And it's because the liver is the direct recipient of the secretory products via portal vein, right? So the liver gets directly all the fat that the visceral fat is producing. So in that case, the liver itself starts changing its own production of pro-inflammatory and pro-thrombotic proteins, which also helps to the cardiovascular disease risk. Here is 2016 review from the international research in cancer. About the international the working group in international research in cancer, and they established all these cancers that are directly associated with obesity. I mean, in this case, it's kind of, they said it a different way. The absence of excess body fatness lowers the risk of cancer. That's how they got the evidence. And in all these cases, there was sufficient evidence to state that. And I don't know if you can read that, but the first one is esophagus adenocarcinoma, and all those others that are really, there's evidence that are really connected to being overweight. And in terms of the relationship between cancer and obesity, there are different mechanisms, mostly the inflammatory mediators that we have mentioned before that promote particularly the initiation of cancer. But for example, for breast cancer, one important factor is also the excess amount of estrogens that are circulating in obesity, because the fat has its own way of producing estrogen. So there's, besides the inflammatory component, we have others. In particular, for example, in colorectal cancer, there's also involved the involvement of that dysbiosis that I mentioned earlier. And in liver, we also have what I said before regarding the lipotoxicity that is particularly important in liver. And this is the figure of recent review that we recently published with Andrew and Sophie and Leila. That it also covers this relationship between adipose tissue and tumor cells. And in addition to the macrophages, and in terms of indicated that there are endocrine signals that I mentioned before in terms of the whole body perspective, but then there are paracrine signals that are within the tumor microenvironment that interact very closely with the tumor cell, the adipocyte, and the tumor-associated macrophages. So between them, they, all these factors that make it become even worse, and actually adipocytes within the tumor microenvironment become typically different from regular adipocytes, and they're called cancer-associated adipocytes, which of course make it all worse, as the name suggests. So, do you remember what I said about inflammation and two-sided sword, right? So far we have discussed how bad it is. However, there's always a however, which I like very much because it's you think outside the box. is necessary for healthy adipose tissue expansion and remodeling, like I said before, right? And this group in 2014 first published this experiment. Of course, this is a selection of a lot of experiments that support the idea. But I like to show these glucose tolerance curves, which are a way of saying that the animal is insulin resistant, or like we can think of diabetes, which is one of the main most important consequences of obesity, eating. So we have here that they have two models of mice that were in which they abolished the inflammatory response. In this case, is a TNF model, and this one is an alpha-read, which is like an enzyme or a protein complex that abolishes a lot of inflammatory responses that have to do with NF-kappa. So in both cases, you see that the animal that has its inflammatory response abolished, the ones in purple, have a worse toleration of glucose. So they are, you can interpret this as diabetic. Okay, that's the simple way of saying it. And the way they propose is very interesting. And I'm quickly explaining this, but basically the injury that with overeating and all what I said before needs the response of the adipose tissue, and that response involves a little bit of inflammation, right? So after that, you go back to your homeostasis. But if you don't, these animals were not able to develop proper adipose tissue, so that's why they got into trouble. And very interestingly, they mentioned this mesenteric adipose tissue, which is a part of the intestinal barrier. So they proposed that this adipose tissue that was also damaged because of the inability to respond with inflammatory response, they were less protected by this barrier, so all the toxins produced within the microbiome, which is also altered in that's very well established. All these toxins could become, it could enter the system and make it grow worse and increase the inflammation. And later on, in 2020, this same group also supported the previous information and also established these two models of rate knockouts. It's uninducible, but it doesn't matter. And they established that this rate was specifically affected when the adipocytes were knocked down. Where when the inflammatory response was inhibited, only the adipocytes. That's when you alter this curve, not when the macrophages, where nothing happens when you abolish the inflammatory response in macrophages. So here, the adipocytes were the important guys. So again, we have this thing that inflammation is important somehow. And historically, they have tried, because of the inflammatory component of obesity, many investigators have tried to see if anti-inflammatory therapy is a good thing to prevent obesity-related diseases. And actually, this questions that. It hasn't been successful so far. There have been very big clinical trials and nothing has worked. And then maybe this is the reason. It's questioning the wisdom of these anti-inflammatory interventions for obesity. So my focus for a few minutes is on inflammation resolution. And anti-inflammatory or counter-inflammatory therapy, that's the question, right? So here's a nice picture of what happens, right? We get in the first red part all the inflammation and after the injury and all the actors that have to act there. And then we slowly transit to this green side, which is all involves all these mediators of the resolution part, which is apparently very, very important to focus on this part, because this is the one that has to act after inflammation has done its job. Okay, so that's when we change from acute to chronic inflammation. So when this is missing, that's when we get into trouble. So here again, these are the two ways of seeing this. So do we want to focus on anti-inflammatory signals, so we don't respond to the stimuli, or we let it be and then anti-inflammatory therapy has a lot of secondary effects. And also we need immunosurveillance. In cancer, for example, we need this to be active. So if we suppress it, we know that we have many problems in certain diseases, not that easy. So again, this to illustrate that we need to make the resolution phase to go back to normal, or we would get to chronic inflammation. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into this, but all these actors are very important to go back from this inflammatory response to back to homeostasis, right? Okay, so I'm going to go very quickly. And these are the discoveries called mediators, and there's a lot of them. One of them, the ones that Estienne mentioned yesterday. And the interesting thing is that we start from the omega-3 fatty acids and all these different pathways that lead to this production. And one of them is also arachidonic acid that we usually associate with pro-inflammatory, like the N6 way, but it depends on which pathway is favored in order to see. So it's not all black and white like we may know about something. I just want to say that. And I'm going to go quickly to this one because it's kind of the thing that was mentioned yesterday, but just to mention how important it is to focus on the resolution part. So I'm going to go, I want to spend these last minutes taking you through our studies in adipose tissue. It's called calcium-sensitive receptor and adipose tissue inflammation and dysfunction. And I thought it was a good idea to present this because of the example maybe for students, because this is how I found my own line of research. And I'm not working on this directly right now, but I think it was like for more than 15 years or something today. So by the time I was finishing my PhD, I came across this paper. My PhD was on calcium nutrition and weight loss, so I was very much into calcium. And I found a paper, a review about this receptor, this protein, the calcium-sensitive receptor, which is a transmembrane GPCR. And calcium is the main ligand for this one, which is the first time that calcium was considered a first agonist. This receptor was discovered in 1993 approximately, and what it does is that it controls the levels of calcium in the blood, basically. So when calcium goes up, it suppresses PTH secretion in the parathyroid gland, so that's its function. But there were so very many interesting things about it, and what happened, to make a long story short, is that we discovered that it was present and expressed in adipose tissue. So from then on, and I was just, the calcium-sensitive receptor was really interesting because of its versatility in terms of the signaling, downstream signaling. And if you look at this carefully, probably you'll find your favorite mediator, your favorite second messenger. So there was a lot of possibilities with this receptor. So, and I just discovered it in adipose tissue. So I had a lot of possibilities, and that's how I started my own investigation. So there was evidence that calcium-sensitive receptor induced inflammation. And I'm going to go really quickly, but we found that there was a role of this receptor in obesity, saying that so the receptor, pro-inflammatory cytokines increase the expression of the receptor, and also that the stimulation of the receptor increased pro-inflammatory cytokine release in adipose tissue. So we also determined and established evidence that obese environment may induce calcium-sensitive receptor expression. So we have excellence from obese people with different degrees of obesity, and the secretory products we expose adipocytes from a cell line, so that the more obese the person was, the more expression of the receptor we got. And then when we had a lot of more explants from subjects with obesity, we have here that as the donor of the fat had an increased body fat, the expression of the receptor increased as well. So here, again, to go quickly, but unfortunately ran out of time, we determined that by stimulating this receptor, we got the elevation of the expression of these cytokines, and also the inflammasome and E3, which is very important in obesity and all these metabolic disorders. We also saw, and I think the next presentation will talk about autophagy, so I'm not going to stop explaining about that, but it's like when the cell its own recycle its own products, and it's related to obesity. And also we saw that the stimulation of the receptor will increase autophagy, and also that was related to inflammation with secretion of TNF-alpha. So we were able to state that autophagy mediates calcium-sensitive receptor-induced TNF production in the adipocytes, and we also could establish this model in which the receptor was related to disrupt autophagy and the production of TNF-alpha, and with that contributing to its functional isolation. Then we established that it was also present in hepatic cells. First, in collaboration with Dr. Michael Reise from the book, we were able to see that it was present in human livers, and also in human hepatocyte cells, where it also had a pro-inflammatory effect. More recently, this is Lautaro Briones' PhD thesis, in which Sergio Wayne is part of the committee, so it's coming soon. And he also saw, in this case, we were interested in the crosstalk between different cell types and adipocytes under the influence of the receptor, and we saw very quickly that when we exposed pre-adipocytes to the receptor, the secretory products of those pre-adipocytes, when hepatocytes were exposed to those, also the hepatocytes were increasing their expression of inflammatory mediators, saying basically that the interaction after the stimulation of these cells, the interaction with other organs was also with a pro-inflammatory reaction. Also, this was seen when hepatocytes were exposed to agonist of the receptor, and we exposed the adipose tissue, and also we got an inflammatory response. So basically, this is all very quickly saying that there's a crosstalk that involves this receptor, and it could worsen all the relationships between adipose tissue and other cell types. This is also in THP1. We also explored that interaction, and believe me, it's the same thing. We exposed THP, the agonist of the receptor, THP1, and the secretory products thereafter also caused inflammation in adipocytes. So there's a whole bunch of interactions that could be worse. So just to finish, this is from 2021 review on the calcium-sensitive receptor regarding cardiovascular disorders, and it was really nice to see that all the part that covered obesity-induced cardiovascular disease covered our research. So it's very nice when you see that they are reading your work and they are putting it there. So it was, very, very nice. With that, I want to thank you for the attention. Sorry, it was so fast. I thought I had more time. I hope you got something here. All the collaborators, the students, and thank you very much.
Yeah, nice presentation. So in the beginning you showed a slide where you got differentiation from three adipocytes to adipocytes. And then basically they go back because of obesity, and then you generate a signaling feedback signal that actually inhibits adipocyte differentiation. So anything was involved there, and that, so basically then, I understood it correctly, if you could actually induce adipocyte differentiation, you would probably resolve the problem, right? So is that a possibility?
Yes. Yeah, great question. So in summary, when you get this inflammation and these inflammatory mediators, such as TNF-alpha, for example, you inhibit all the machinery for differentiation of pre-adipocytes into adipocytes. Pre-adipocytes start accumulating, and they are very phenotypically similar to macrophages, to M1 macrophages. So they start their own inflammatory story. And besides, like I said before, the remaining adipocytes have to handle all the coming fat, so they become even more sick. So there are some therapies that particularly, and this goes basically through PPAR gamma inhibition, like the transcription factor that is like the master regulator of differentiation, adipocyte differentiation. So there are some therapies, particularly anti-diabetic therapies that induce PPAR gamma, and that helps insulin sensitivity. But actually, it does one of the side effects is it does induce fat production because you get more adipocytes. And in terms of health, that's a good thing because you get more adipocytes to handle the fat. The problem is that you're eating more, so that more than you spend. The problem is not in adipose tissue. The problem is that you eat more, so you can't. You need to handle that, and you will need more adipocytes to handle that fat in a healthy way. So it's very hard to propose, an adipogenic therapy because no one will want that, of course. But yes, I always get the question of how, and you have probably all heard about all these therapies, or I couldn't call it therapy, but these ways of handling obesity. It's like destroy fat, right? Destroy adipocytes. And can you imagine what destroying adipocytes will cause in terms of inflammation, like cryo, like polycystis, and all the things that you heard here? It's horrible because you just, you get inflammation, you get dead adipocytes, and guess what happens with dead adipocytes? So you don't want to destroy it. You want to eat less than you spend. That's it.
No.
That sounds easy. So regarding the calcium sensitive receptor, the last part that you presented, besides calcium, is there any other ligand described for this receptor?
Yes, a lot. There's actually that horrible picture that I showed that with a lot of ligands and a lot of downstream signaling. Yes, there are a lot. They're pharmacological. There are some, for example, polyamines are ligands for that. So there's a lot of room for even pH. There's a lot of stimulators, endogenous stimulators for that.
Thank you. And that brings me to the second question. Maybe it's a easy question, but is calcium increased in adipose tissue chronically inflamed? Extracellular calcium.
Extracellular calcium is very. Yeah. Well,
I mean,
there's
because
a lot
of the I'm isolating the connection
yes.
with
Well, in terms of the inflammatory process and the destruction of adipocytes, you expect like in the milieu of the local. There should be more calcium going on there in terms of those before the clearance happens. There should be a lot of calcium going on there. So there could be like a very important stimulus for the receptor there. It should be clear though after, when it's chronic, of course, you will have probably a local, which is very hard to study though, because calcium is very, very strictly controlled in circulation for all these reasons. But locally, I think there should be a lot of extracellular, high extracellular calcium there as a permanent thing.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation. You were really fast, but I thought most of the points. I got stuck with the word of resolution, and I finally didn't get if this calcium sensing receptor is part of the resolution
kind of creating more risk. Yeah, it's creating more inflammation. Yes. The thing is that you could act suppressing the receptor's response because there are tools for that. And that's what I was thinking, that you could suppress sensitivity and then maybe lower the inflammatory response. So, reasoning for that.
Okay, think now with the solution because I thought that what's where we supposed to be. So there is some kind of, I don't know, nutrition apart from exercise that we know how we not do that helps with the resolution by maybe suppressing this receptor.
No, I don't have evidence regarding suppression of the receptor. I mean, I thought of it, maybe we could find some mechanisms, probably. That's a very good research question. But in terms of nutrition, well, we saw that the omega-3 line and all those derivatives are aiding in the resolution part, which is very important. It's another reason. I wasn't very fan of the recommendations of omega-3 and everything because I'm like more dietary sources. With this and with the talk of yesterday, that we saw that we could stimulate maybe the pathways somehow, like reinforce the pathways that lead to these pro-resolving mediators. Because it's not just that, like she said yesterday, maybe people that are in trouble are because they don't get so quickly from the omega-3 to the actual active compounds. So maybe there's risk, an opportunity for researching those pathways. How could we reinforce the production of these pro-resolving mediators?
You work with intermittent fasting. Is associated with the increase in inflammation that obesity produces, or the type of food produces the inflammation? What is the target that you are trying to solve with the
Question. Well, actually, this has information. But yeah, currently I'm working on intermittent fasting in people with obesity. And one of the mechanisms, there are many mechanisms that are proposed and discussed. Why intermittent fasting works, not just or not really for reducing weight, but for improving metabolic health, which that's the basic need. And in that sense, one of the injuries that constant eating causes is that it creates an inflammatory response. Eating itself, like eating, you create an inflammatory response. So if you eat all day long, you have that constant injury that is supposed to be prevented if you organize your eating habits into windows. In this particular case, an 8-hour window of eating, and then you give a break to your body the whole 16 hours to generate a lot of mechanisms in which that fasting promotes. In simple words.